did you get up really early?
5 o'clock, left the house. Taxi left at 5.
And you're gonna
Butterfly Kisses is a film about 3 young teenagers growing up in a council estate in South London when they're confronted with something that none of them ever saw coming, and the film documents the moment in time when these 3 boys grow up. The role of a writer in this case might be slightly different because I also co-own the production company that produced the film, and I'm a co-producer on the project. This was actually the very first film that, as a company, we wanted to make, but as you know, the film is quite controversial and it raises some very difficult questions. So it took a long time to actually get this film made, and it ended up being the 4th film that we produced rather than the first. My role was, first of all, to write a script that would allow us to raise funding for the film. Then it was to attach a director on, and we attached a fantastic director called Raphael Kapelinski. It was his debut feature. And then it was to create a film together with Raphael that was going to mold and match his style of directing and allow his voice to come into the script so that he could have the freedom that he wanted to on set. So how I got the idea for Butterfly Kisses was actually quite a while before I wrote the project for the film, and it was a subject that I was interested in from nearly the same age as the protagonist in the film. So the protagonists in the film grow up in a world that's heavily saturated in sex and porn, and everywhere they look it seems to be pressure on these kids to lose their virginity and push things from one extreme to the next. And I grew up in a very similar environment in Belfast in Northern Ireland, and it was this culture of trying to outdo each other and try to push things more and more extreme. Then one day I was sitting in a snooker hall where we all used to hang out as friends, and on the news, on the television screen, there was a celebrity who was being tried for paedophilia. And the hatred that came from my 2 friends who were sitting beside me towards this guy was tangible. And it's not to say whether that hatred was right or wrong, but what it made me think was, I wonder what this guy's childhood friends think about him now. Did they see this coming? Did this man wake up on his 40th birthday and all of a sudden decide, this is what I'm going to do today? Or actually is this something that probably happened right back when he was a teenager and he was going through puberty and he was the same age as me? And then I looked at my friends and I thought, if one of those 2 was struggling with something like this, would they be able to talk to me? And the answer was no. And so I guess right way back then when I was 16, that's when I began to question the preconceived notions of the stereotype of this kind of character. So why I'm interested in teenagers, I guess, is because that's not that long ago for me, and I'm quite young in this game, and what I'm interested in writing and exploring is different takes on things that I've been through and that I've observed while growing up, and that's just what interests me for now. So how the title of the film, Butterfly Kisses, came about was that in researching the film, it had to be incredibly in-depth. It's a very difficult subject, and it's very difficult to get the balance right between humanizing a character and forcing you to feel sorry for him. So we wanted to make sure that we had all the kind of medical background and everything correct on the subject before going into it. So we got in touch with a doctor who's a world specialist in the subject in America called Dr. Sarah Good, and she put us in touch with 3 people who are in the same position as the protagonist in the film, 3 people who have these inclinations but haven't offended. And how these people contacted us was via email, and they would send us disposable emails that would self-destruct within 30 seconds of reading them because they were so worried about being caught or that we were going to out them. And one of them used a pseudonym, which was Butterfly Kisses.
Okay.
So having seen La Haine many times growing up, and I'm a big fan of the film, in terms of the writing of the project, there were 2 films that I was using as references. One was La Haine, and another was a film by Harmony Korine, directed by Larry Clark, an American film called Kids. And these 2 films were definitely on my mind when I was writing the project, in terms of the dialogue and the dynamic between these three young male boys growing up in a world that isn't necessarily what they were promised. In terms of the direction of the film, I guess it's a bit of a fluke really that the film actually ended up being shot in black and white like La Haine, because the director's never actually seen La Haine, the film.
Totally not, yeah.
So in terms of the writing, yes, it was an inspiration, but in terms of the aesthetic quality, it's a fluke.
Okay.
So the reception of the film overall has been incredibly positive. I was tentative or nervous because it's a subject that's very rarely broached and is very rarely, if ever, broached in this manner. The film breaks the stereotype of the creepy man at the playground gate, and says, what was this guy like when he was 16 years old and when he was running around with his friends. So the going into the first screenings of the film, I was very nervous. The film had its world premiere in the Berlin Film Festival 2017, in the Generation category, where it won the Crystal Bear for Best Film, and the reception there was overwhelmingly positive. And I think from then on we realised that we had actually created something that does hit the right notes, isn't insensitive, isn't gratuitous, but actually is a very thought-provoking piece of cinema. So a project that we have just finished filming is called Reprobate. It stars Lily Newmark, and it is set again in a very similar environment as Butterfly Kisses. It's set in South London. It's about how in London you have council blocks and projects on one side of the road and you have mansions on the other, and there's no divide between the two. Now where I'm from in Northern Ireland, the council projects are all kept in one area and the rich people are kept in a separate area, but that's not what it's like in London. So what's interesting is the fascination that these two sides, who live side by side, have with each other. And what you have is lots of rich kids who are fascinated with the violence and the glamour and the glamorization of the violence in the council estate. So Reprobate is a film about a young rich girl, Lily Newmark, who falls in love with a boy from the other side of the tracks. And this boy actually in reality is a sweetheart, and he's not a bad guy, but he's pushing the boundaries and trying to impress this girl and pushing it further and further, and she keeps pushing him, and eventually they do something that they can't turn back from. And from there the film spirals out of control and they become more and more involved in this gang life, until it breaks really. So it's a modern day Romeo and Juliet.